Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00 and today's look at episode 3 of the Halo TV series and points to note. I'll say before we get started that this is probably one of the most brutal episodes of the TV series so far. There are some scenes that are actually very alarming and differ fundamentally from the established lore surrounding the events that take place. And they most definitely seem to be leaning into the idea of the Halsey that we got from the Karen Traviss books as opposed to the Halsey we got from the earlier novels, in that they're painting Halsey to be the nth degree war criminal. But we'll touch on that shortly. For now, let's look at the episode. We start off quite early on by looking at the origin story of the Blessed One, and we can see elites using a luminary. Now, luminaries are Forerunner devices that the Covenant had reappropriated in order to find other Forerunner artifacts. This is actually in the lore how the war between humanity and the Covenant got started. The Covenant first came across Harvest, and their luminary told them that the surface of the world was littered with Forerunner relics. Of course, the age-old mistranslation for reclamation versus reclaimer was the fundamental issue. When they actually got planetside, they realised that it was actually the humans themselves that the luminary was detecting, and the fragment of mendicant bias inside the anodyne spirit key ship at the centre of High Charity confirmed as such that the Covenant had an age-old mistranslation, since this was fundamentally uprooting the very foundations of the Covenant's religion. The three prophets of the time decided to treat humanity as vermin, as an affront to the gods that needed to be exterminated, as opposed to actually being the reclaimers of their gods' artifacts. As we touched upon in the series 2 points of note, reclaimers exist in both the Silver timeline and in the major timeline for the Halo books and the Halo games. Reclaimers are humans who have a gene song or gesh that allows them to interface with Forerunner artifacts. Now, not all humans are capable of doing as such, only some are capable, those that actually carry a gene song. In the Halo games and the books, it's not extremely common, but it's much more common than it appears to be in the TV show. In the TV show, it seems to be, well, extraordinarily rare, to say the least. The elite we see in the episode is actually carrying the luminary, when it was previously understood that a luminary was a very large device that couldn't actually be carried into a battlefield, so to speak. So this is another point that's slightly different from the established lore. Nevertheless, the luminary glows brighter and brighter and gives clear indication that the Blessed One is a reclaimer. It stands to reason then that should a luminary come in close proximity to the Master Chief, it will have a similar reaction. The TV show, at least at the moment, hasn't established exactly how the war between humanity and the Covenant first kicked off, but one can assume if the luminaries are still capable of detecting reclaimers, it's something at least roughly along the lines of how it happened in the major lore, but obviously with some notable differences. The next point of note is when Halsey is dealing with her Flash clone. Now, again, earlier on I said that they seem to be leaning on the idea of Halsey being the war criminal that we got from the Karen Traviss novels. And the thing is, as this episode has progressed, and when I've weighed that up against the behaviours of Dr. Halsey in the previous episodes, I have actually found myself hating this version of Halsey. And I don't mean hating it as a basis of, like, I don't like the TV show. I mean hating the character of Halsey, which I think is exactly what the TV show is trying to push at. Her heartlessness, her manipulations, her lack of compassion and empathy, her sole focus on her own self-development, her self-promotion, is shameless. And as a consequence, I'm genuinely finding myself hating this version of Halsey, which, as I said, is exactly what they seem to be going for. It's her manipulations of the Master Chief, it's her manipulations of Cortana and using Cortana as a spy on the Master Chief, it's her manipulations of Margaret Parangoski, the head of the Office of Naval Intelligence. I mean, how the hell did she swing that? to be able to manipulate Synconi in front of the rest of the High Command Board of the UNSC. I mean, what? Her neglect of Miranda, her lack of concern for killing her Flash clone, and this is one of the big first points of note that I'd like to really talk about. The Flash clone of Dr. Halsey that was used for the cognitive impression modelling process for making a smart AI data matrix. Now, in the established lore, Halsey created clones of herself that had poor physical development in favour of the cognitive development, the cerebral development that she needed for cognitive impression modelling. The Flash clones never actually became aware, so to speak. They were never awake. They were literally grown purposely for their brains. Then that she did a memory transfer, effectively, something that she had, a new technique that she had pioneered, and then harvested the brains from her Flash clones and then used those for cognitive impression modelling. Now, under normal circumstances, cognitive impression modelling can be performed on the brain of a recently deceased donor. Now, then that means that there's no real human suffering, so to speak, involved in the process. That is the polar opposite to what we got in the TV show. In the TV show, we have a fully aware, fully conscious clone of Dr. Halsey. Now, just because it's a clone doesn't mean that it lacks sentience, it doesn't lack feelings, it doesn't lack empathy. In fact, she's fully aware, fully articulate, able to ask questions, has all of Halsey's memories. For all intent and purpose, the clone is a living, breathing, feeling human being. And Halsey, with the help of her simping little assistant, paralysed this human being and then initiated cognitive impression modelling while she was still awake in a very unpleasant and gruesome way, which effectively looks like it uses some sort of smart material or programmable matter to break down the brain while the person is still awake, while they're still alive, while they can still feel it. You can hear the heart monitor in the background beating faster and faster, showing that this clone was scared. This person, this human being, was terrified of what was about to happen. And then when the process actually started to take hold, the heartbeat dwindles off quite rapidly. But you know for a fact, while whatever process is taking place to harvest the brain, she's feeling that. She's feeling that as it happens. And it looks like it happens from the prefrontal cortex backwards. Now, the prefrontal cortex is, at least from our best measurements, where our consciousness is seated. It's the newest part of the brain, evolutionarily speaking. So she had to endure having her consciousness basically disintegrated, but still effectively having enough brain behind it, the animal and the reptilian brain, the older, more primitive brain behind it, to keep the body alive. It's a particularly powerful scene, a particularly gruesome scene, and is, like I said, completely opposite to how cognitive impression modelling takes place in the wider lore. And this was one of the major things in this episode specifically that made me hate the version of Halsey, this character of Halsey that we've got in front of us, because she had no emotion, she had no qualms whatsoever. Even the questioning before the procedure took place was almost like she was teasing her, almost. It's cruel, to be quite honest. The Halsey we've seen is cold, calculated, and cruel. And I think if that's what the show was aiming for, they've literally hit the nail on the head, because I actually hate this version of Halsey, and it's one of those situations where I actually want something bad to happen to this character, because, well, it's normal, isn't it? In these kind of storytellings, you want the bad guy to get their comeuppance. I want Halsey to get her comeuppance, which, for anybody who's seen a lot of my content, anybody who knows me, knows that actually the Halsey from the books is my favourite version of Halsey, and I really like the complexity of the character of Halsey from the books, versus this, which is just, I hate her. I just hate her. Onwards from that, we see the process of Chief receiving Cortana. Now, first and foremost, there's no Spartan neural interface data port visible on the base of the skull on Chief. Now, first and foremost, there should be a Spartan neural interface at least in place for the control systems of Mjolnir, because Mjolnir, the whole thing about Mjolnir is that it bypasses the body. That's why it can increase its reaction time so fast, because it can pick up the impulses of your motor movements from the brainstem, from your cerebellum and your cerebral cortex and your motor cortex before they even exit the brain, convert it to a digital signal. And since digital signals move through cables and wires at nearly the speed of light versus the nerve conduction velocity that we get for moving electrochemical signals through our bodies, that's why it works so fast. That's why Mjolnir works so well. And yet Chief completely lacks any discernible external Spartan neural interface port. So I'm assuming that there must be something that perhaps links to his brain inside the suit wirelessly, I suppose. That's at least just a shot in the dark in that regard. But then onwards from that, when he actually does receive Cortana, it's not like he receives Cortana as a data chip that can be removed or anything like that from his Spartan neural interface. In fact, if anything, it looks like, again, she's almost injected into his brain. Again, maybe through a smart material, maybe the process of injecting whatever the hell the smart material programmable matter was from the needle into the Halsey clone that kind of harvested her brain, broke it down or scanned it somehow and replicated it in a smart material, then miniaturize that process and then reintroduce that smart material into Chief's brain to co-inhabit inside of his cerebral cortex. It's very odd. And on top of that, the suggestion is that somehow this implanted system has its own holographic projectors that can allow Cortana to manifest anywhere in the room around Chief somehow. I don't know how that works at all. I mean, generally speaking, you'd accept that if there's a holographic projector, it needs to actually project photons of light somehow into the room, into three-dimensional space for it to manifest, and yet there's no discernible signs of any surface interface to allow photon projections. So what? Nevertheless, I also suspend my disbelief. It's 500 years in the future. It's the silver timeline. I'm just going to accept it at face value. Okay, fine. We'll accept it and move on. Chief's initial resistance to Cortana actually somewhat mirrors what it was in the books, although Chief was much more curious, much more willing to cooperate because he trusted Halsey implicitly, and ultimately he saw the utility of Cortana very soon after her implantation. That being said, there is resistance to Cortana in Chief's mannerisms, and he's quite dismissive of her. Like, he just doesn't like the fact that she's even there, and only really kind of gets a hint at the utility of Cortana when he's looking for information regarding the visions he's having when he's touching the Forerunner artifact. So when she starts to help him, as per the orders of Halsey, who is kind of implanted Cortana to spy on the Chief as opposed to being an ally, Chief sees the utility and starts to come around to the idea of having Cortana, but there's still very evident resistance and discomfort at her presence. Next, I'd like to touch base on the Blessed One. I think she's augmented. I think she's a prelate. In fact, I don't think it's even a case of I think it's pretty self-evident. There's a scene where she can project something along the lines of either blamite or an energy blade from under her fingernails. I mean, last time I checked, I don't have blades under my fingernails, so that's something new to her physiology. So I would assume that because she's been in the care of the Covenant for most of her life, she's been augmented with Covenant augmentations, which are probably, or at least more than likely, the Sanshayum prelate augmentations. So I think she is almost Master Chief's opposite. You know, in these kind of stories, there's always like a protagonist, antagonist. There's always the hero, the villain, the light, the dark. She seems to be almost an unarmored version of Chief, in that she evidently has augmentations. She's probably kind of a human prelate, so to speak, and that makes her a super soldier by definition. So, and because, again, we're dealing with the Covenant are much older, much more technologically advanced than us as a species, the likelihood is her augmentations are that much better, which means she probably doesn't need the armor in order to go toe-to-toe with Chief. So we could be looking at kind of an Ilsa Zane kind of situation, you know, where Ilsa Zane and Spartan Palmer fought against each other, one in armor, one out of armor, and yet they were pretty much, you know, equal footing. I think we're looking towards something like that happening down the line. Interesting, an interesting dynamic. It'd be strange to see what their first encounter will be. And finally, one of the last big things I want to talk about is Chief's emotional response. So he makes the decision to remove the chip from the base of his spine, which inhibits his emotional response. Now, as far as I'm concerned, at least from my perspective, to fully facilitate the role of humanity's saviour, our greatest warrior, our hero, our superhero, one must feel a deep and meaningful connection to the rest of humanity. Because if you don't, then you're just following orders, you're not feeling anything, you're emotionless, you are military hardware. That's a theme that was being driven in Halo 4 very much. But having an emotional, emphatic connection to others and to the human experience makes you a better and more deserving hero. Because the emotional attachment is an extraordinarily powerful source of energy, effectively. Anyone knows that you can focus powerful emotional energy at a task and it can boost your performance and capabilities tenfold. As anyone who knows anything about hysterical strength, emotionally fueled adrenal response, and how our most powerful emotions can manifest physically, everyone knows the stories of mothers or parents that have seen their children in mortal danger and have performed superhuman feats of strength in order to save their child. This is fueled by an adrenaline surge and an emotionally motivated action. Having emotional connection, having to be able to feel the human experience and empathize with other human beings would make Chief a better soldier. And in the wider lore, it does make Chief a better soldier. He doesn't like losing people. He doesn't like losing soldiers under his command. He doesn't like seeing innocent lives suffer. That's one of the big motivating factors behind Chief's character, and we're just getting that now. Up until now, he's been an unfeeling, emotionless piece of military equipment. He's just now starting to wake up and starting to become the Chief that we're probably more used to seeing him be. One that has his humanity intact, is intrinsically connected to humanity and wants to fight for humanity as opposed to just following orders. And of course I am referencing the Chief from the books as well as the games. Obviously in the games there's only so much narrative that can be told. With the exception of Halo Infinite, they've sort of pushed a little bit more towards the humanity in Chief's story in Halo Infinite, but generally speaking, the wider Chief, anyone who's read the wider books and things like that will know that Chief is much more motivated by his humanity and by his emotions than he appears in the games, and definitely significantly more than he's appeared in the TV show so far. But it's great to finally see Chief becoming Chief, actually having that connection. And that ties back into his memories from when he was a child on Irandus 2. Now that mirrors the established lore already anyway, it's John's homeworld. But in the books it was an inner colony world, which means it was well developed, it was well populated, it was a beacon of commercial and industrial strength for the UNSC. In the TV show, it was a colony that was being prepared for inhabitation. It was being terraformed and altered to some degree. There were geologists present, and it seems to suggest, at least from some of his flashbacks and some of the narrative that is pushed forward, that Chief's parents may have been geologists on Irandus 2 and came across a Forerunner artifact, the other half of the Forerunner artifact of the one that we see in the TV series so far. And that because Chief is a reclaimer, and he's been a reclaimer since he was born because of his gene song, it spoke to Chief. And it seems to suggest that his father was aware that it spoke to Chief somehow, or that he was having visions as a consequence of this Forerunner artifact and was trying to talk John out of it or try to convince him otherwise, or I don't know. It seems like he just didn't like the fact that John was having these visions and was doing everything he could to bury the evidence, in some cases literally. And this ties back to John ultimately being destined for his position, so to speak. But again, all in all, although there wasn't an immense amount of action shots in this particular episode, again, it's more of a human-driven story, but it's certainly widened the narrative and given us some interesting points to pay attention to going forward. Thanks for watching, commenting, liking and subscribing. I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members: Spartan10148, my Metarch; Dylan, Falcon X003, Kenwood, Irrefutable Justice, Leon, Neek and Ramiz, my monitors; Alvin, Andrew, Brand, Brian, Cameron, Chris, Darian, Devon, Flaming Halo, Greenblood, Kyle, Legions Lost, Michael, Prophet Bear, Spartan and Wolf, my sub-monitors; my fleet of Strato Sentinels; my diligent enforcers; and all the other awesome people that have jumped aboard to support the channel over at Patreon. Another shout out to Todd Morrison, my transcendent YouTube member. And just one quick reminder to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord. Much love from 00. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.